Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Cyber Liability and Emerging Risks in Technology Services, System Integrators, Alarm and Security Companies. Today we have with us Wayne Dean, Vice President at McGriff Insurance Services, Billy Gravely, Account Executive at McGriff Insurance Services, and Hannah Hofflinger, Professional Lines Broker at INSUREtrust. As Vice President at McGriff Insurance Services, Mr. Dean's responsibilities are to provide risk management consulting, innovative solutions, and bring strategy to minimize risk and cost. During the 16 years of service in the commercial insurance industry, Mr. Dean has acted as risk advisor and insurance placement, maintaining and servicing middle to large size accounts. Mr. Dean's primary focus is with system integrators and PSA members. Billy works on the team with Wayne and helps with new business and existing clients, focusing on PSA clients and helping to tailor risk management programs to fit their needs. He also helps to facilitate the value-added services to clients such as training, risk management review, and contract review. Billy worked in the insurance industry for 12 years as an underwriter in the carrier side and then on the agency side. Hannah helps in brokering new business as well as large and complex renewals in the middle market space for cyber and technology risk. Formerly, she worked as an underwriter focusing on cyber, tech, and MPL. She was a risk analytics major in college with a concentration in actuarial science and conducted research in cyber risk and modeling and big data. In today's webinar, Wayne, Billy, and Hannah will explore who is in INSUREtrust and McGriff Insurance, the evolution of network security, privacy, and insurance, big data and the Internet of Things, technology errors and omissions, and exposures facing system integrators in the alarm security industry. My name is Julie Rolls. I am the training manager at PSA, and I will be moderating today's call. I have just a few quick housekeeping items before I hand it over to Wayne, Billy, and Hannah. First, if you have not done so already, please mute yourself. If you happen to have any questions throughout the course of this presentation, please type them into the chat panel, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end of this presentation. If you happen to run into any technical difficulties, I will also be monitoring chat for this purpose, and will do my best to get you back up and running should you have any problems. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Wayne, Billy, and Hannah.
Thank you, Julie. Hope everybody's doing well today. It is a cold day where I am right now, but want to talk to you a little bit about cyber liability today, errors and omissions, and we're going to give you some claims examples of what we're seeing in your industry. First and foremost, who we are. We are McGriff Insurance. We're the fifth largest insurance broker in the country, and we've concentrated in the system integrating world for the last 9 years. My team and I have participated in many of the PSA events, convention tech, and done sessions. So if you have been to one of our sessions, you may see some of the same material, but nonetheless, we have concentrated in this industry. Cyber liability has been a big topic, and it's something that is a concern to many out there. That's why you're on the call today. INSUREtrust. INSUREtrust is a partner of ours. They're a wholesale broker based out of Atlanta, Georgia. They control the market where markets that offer cyber liability that us retail brokers can't get to. So they're a strong partner of ours. Hannah, who will be on the call here in just a second, is an expert in this
I'm
field.
here, by the way, Billy.
Oh, you are here. Hey, Hannah.
Yes. Hey.
She is a great partner and does many of these webinars across the country, and a lot of partners with us as far as looking at other companies. Let me see. Sorry, I'm getting lost in the shuffle. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to turn this over to Hannah now. And Hannah, we're on who we are as an INSUREtrust and network security, privacy, and insurance.
Okay, great. And apologies for being late. I had some technical difficulties, as you know, it's inevitable. But thank you guys for being patient. So yeah, we partner with McGriff. Been in the space for 20 years. Our CEO was one of the first to draft a cyber liability policy. So we've got a lot of data, a lot of expertise in the space, and been doing it a long time. So hopefully can give you guys some good insight on some of the major coverages and why it's important in your space. So network security, privacy, and insurance. So I like to put it this way because cyber liability isn't the best word because it doesn't totally encompass everything that this policy covers. So, it's not just a website, it's not just digital data, it's much more than that. So we're going to go through the breadth of the coverage. So state of the marketplace today, so there's a lot of carriers in the space, almost 170 right now, but really only 50 to 70 that are doing it correctly. So what we see a lot now are some of the larger kind of GL-based companies that are doing package policies are also trying to add on some sort of data breach or cyber coverage. But for the most for standalone crafted coverage, it's really going to be addressing your exposure and its uniqueness. A lot of those policies are inadequate. So those add-ons, the things that are maybe a minimal part of those package policies, we're not seeing them address those risks properly. So we'll go through that as well. So emerging risks we'll talk about social engineering and voice manipulation and how that goes into cyber coverage and kind of an overlap along with crime coverage. And then also just in general how the coverage has evolved. So why you need cyber insurance, that is the question of the day. So we're going to go through some of those claims and just be able to make these scenarios more tangible for you guys. So that is one of the biggest pushbacks we get is that, how do I know this is going to happen? How is it going to happen? And how do I have this conversation with my CFO? How do I tell him I think we need this coverage? So that's the goal of today too. And also talking about the overlap between cyber and tech. So a lot of you on the call probably have some kind of exposure when it comes to maybe reselling software or hardware. Maybe you are involved in design of systems, and maybe you do even have a network security aspect to what you do. But we're going to be able to try and tailor that and then take questions at the end as well. So current state of the market, like I said, a lot of carriers, only a select few of those that are doing it great. There's a lot of really broad policies out there. So what we do and what we partner with McGriff on a lot is really talking about, and like I said, tailoring the coverage to who the insured is, but being able to differentiate between which carrier is going to give you the best coverage for what your risk is, period, what your budget is, what deductible you're willing to pay, but really crafting that to make sure that all things line up to your wish list. So customer wants, so there's many competitors, like I said, a lot of carriers out there competing on one price, but what we do is craft that to what you guys need. So claims examples, there are, and this is one space where, it's not like property, casualty, general lines where, you have a sprinkler system, you're less likely to get a fire. You know what the likelihood is of a storm in that area. There's perils that are a lot easier to track because there's a lot of data. Cyber is one where it's very new. As technologies evolve and as businesses evolve, we are trying to understand what those data risks are and make sure that we're adequately covering for them. So what we're going to talk about now is a few claims examples that are hopefully, able to illustrate that and be a little bit more relevant for you guys. And, a good takeaway, a good scenario to walk through with your team and your company. So, and that is the data aspect and the claims example aspect. It's just something that we're constantly building a database of and really trying to hone in on what's going to be a relevant conversation for your decision-making counterparts. So this is one, there's a security integrator that actually, is a PSA member as well. And they had, so an email compromise, this is in that social engineering realm that I mentioned in a couple slides ago. But this was one particular example where the invoice itself was intercepted and falsified, so they were able to manipulate the bank wiring instructions. So we're seeing a lot more of this kind of attack where, people especially that are using a lot of subcontractors or vendors, hackers will come in, monitor the environment, and be able to say, okay, I know that there's a big payment going through to these guys, or, they've made this payment quite often. They seem comfortable with this vendor. Let's see if we can intercept it and manipulate this transaction. So in this one in particular, the third party wired the money as instructed, looked like it was coming from the system integrator. And of course it wasn't. It was a hacker acting as them. And the forensic cost itself on these, so this is something, and we'll get into this, it's not just the damages or the liability or the likelihood that you're going to get sued or your client's going to need money from you to recuperate from some loss or loss of information. It's also the fact that you as a business have to initiate those costs on your end. So what we'll talk to in policies is, forensic costs being outside the limit, and forensic costs, maybe being a $0 deductible if it's really important to you that you get that initial cost and it's not going to come out of your pocket. But these things can get really expensive, just like I said, the initial handling of the breach, and then the actual cost or the actual loss of funds as well. So that's what that social engineering coverage is. So it's designed to cover the theft of data and or money, but that's voluntarily parted funds. So that's classically something that was covered under crime policies where, someone's can't kidnap, ransom, or just theft of property or funds, period. Now, this has evolved into cyber because it's part of the digital age. It's digital funds that are being manipulated around and people hacking into accounts, email accounts, and servers in order to make this happen. So cyber's really stepped up to try and pick up this exposure. Now, we usually recommend you contemplate it on both policies if you can, but something that we consult with insureds all the time, along with McGriff, to talk about, what the largest wire transfer you make is and what limit makes sense for you to buy. But this particular circumstance, there's some policies that will cover the manipulation of that invoice, even if there was no actual breach to your account. So we'll see where they've gone in and just impersonated you, but you actually don't have any kind of hack. So some insurers will say, well, look, we didn't mean to pick that up. That's something that we can't control, nor can you control. That's something that the vendor should be responsible for because they didn't properly authenticate what the email that was being sent, where some policies are actually coming in and stepping up and saying, look, this is impersonation fraud, and this happened via, your online communications. So we want to step up to the plate and make sure that it doesn't cause a bad relationship between you and your vendor, that this money is lost and neither of you have it back. So we're going to try and make you whole again. So that's just something that's one of the more complex areas of cyber risk right now, but certainly something that we can craft and really be able to isolate that risk for you. So system integration company provides software and hardware integration services. And these guys so this one is an example where they had malicious code that wasn't caught whenever they did their quality assurance review of that software and hardware before it was implemented within their client systems. So they uploaded it, and again, this is an error from a technology E&O standpoint and potentially a cyber overlaps, which is why we always try and recommend that those coverages are purchased on the same policy. And in this particular example, they lost in excess of $400,000 after it was all said and done. Not only the interruption to the customer's operations, but just the sheer cost of going in and having to make sure that, they want to make sure there's no class action. Could this have happened to other customers that we weren't aware of? Could there be more money pursued against us in a lawsuit? So really going through and making sure everything's cleaned out, making sure that they don't have some aggregation risk where multiple clients now suffered from the same error in the quality assurance, but but these can get really expensive when it is, a particular hardware or software. And even if these, I don't remember if this particular company was providing their own software hardware, but even if it was from a manufacturer, and even if these guys had a contract in place saying that the manufacturer was going to, the thing happened, they're still on the hook for not only the defense costs, but probably a lot of the initial costs and some of the settlement, because they were the ones ensuring that that technology was going to fulfill some kind of purpose and react in a certain way, and it didn't. So they are going to be on the hook in some way, shape, or form, and it's their responsibility to go pursue the manufacturer on their end, and that's something that the policy would do for you if you have an adequate policy in place. Next one, software hardware resellers. So they're doing the reselling and the installation, and of course the maintenance services for, in this particular case, it was an accounting software, but their customers had an audit, and it revealed a bunch of different misclassifications in the transactions that were recorded. And although, and this happens in many cases when they believe the problem was corrected, there's still fees or compliance issues that the customer is still incurring after the fact. So they're still going to want to go up against and say, look, you guys fixed this, yes, but now on the back end, our own clients are mad at us, or, there's a regulatory body after us because they're saying that our information was corrupted and that's not meeting up to standards. So another example, over a six-figure loss for something that, could have been caught within that quality assurance time period, and, potentially something that if customer information was lost in there as well, it would have overlapped into both tech E&O and cyber liability coverage. Social engineering, this is another one, willful parting of funds. So this is one where they actually called the company's bank saying that there'd been a problem with the payment. And the caller told the employee that, it could have been made manually if the bank, had the security code. But the employee became suspicious, and they did alert the managers, but there was still over $500,000 loss. And that's because banks can't always put a stop to these transfers. So even if it's caught down the line, or there's, some kind of fraud detection in place, it's not always going to be recouped, and maybe it won't even, maybe it'll only be partially recouped. But in these situations, time is of the essence, and if it's not handled correctly on the front end, we do a lot of times from a human error perspective, we see a lot of, account managers and people on the back office end that, do these transactions on a daily basis, but don't necessarily have the adequate controls in place to make sure it's not going to happen. So unfortunately, in this circumstance, it is, and we say this a lot, but it is addressed in the crime policy. But we do encourage you to have the coverage in both policies, because it can be offered and it can act in excess of either policy, which means that you'd have a total aggregate larger amount of money if both policies respond than if you only had it on one or the other. So last example here that we're going to go through, and this was another PSA member that had the invoice manipulation, where it was a phishing email that allowed entry into the network to capture login credentials. So that's something else we see where it wasn't necessarily a cut and dry, someone just came in, asked for the funds, and it was sent, and that was the end of it. A lot of the time with these, it is a hacker actually sitting in the network for an extended period of time before making their move. So here, they were actually looking at email activity, figuring out who their victim was, essentially. And so after looking at vendor communications, they were able to, again, intercept and make sure that the funds were received. And some of the money was recovered in this case. Like I said, sometimes it can be, but again, still over it's a $375,000 loss to the customer. And they didn't have crime coverage. So it was really important that we were able to get the cyber policy to come in, step up, and pay the funds transfer here, because those phishing attacks, again, they can get tricky, especially if they've been in the system. So again, this is kind of an invoice manipulation meets social engineering coverage offered in the cyber policy, and still best to have them on both policies. And in this case, they did cover the forensic costs as well. So emerging risks, I have spoken at a few events where it was at very large central stations, people with really sophisticated business operations, as well as app and IT development in-house. So, we all want the newest offering. We want to be cutting edge. We also want to be efficient to our customers. So people want things in the palm of their hand. They don't want to have to get up to change a control over. They don't want to have to come physically to their home to make sure that they've, all the windows are shut or whatever it is. The fact that the technology is evolving the way it is opening up a lot more avenues, if you will, for these hackers to get in. So they're looking for any vulnerability they can. This happened with ADT technology a couple years ago. A white hat hacker found out that one of their applications that was connecting to the wall devices was completely vulnerable, and they were able to go in and see if neighbors' windows were open, or see if they left a door unlocked, that kind of thing. So it hack into cameras, and it's becoming the fact that we're evolving as much as we are. It's becoming harder and harder to keep up from a network security, encryption standpoint. So the policy, both cyber and tech, it's really here to buff out that gray area where it's like, look, we know that you guys can't sit and read, regulatory excerpts and, emerging risks, network security white papers. Like, there's already so much that's going on from a business standpoint. So for the policies to react to this gray area, it's really important for our insurers that are trying to, be more cutting edge. They're trying to get more into the technology development stage, and maybe more of the design phase. But more so than just that, it's going to cover, any error you might have in the reselling process. So even if you're not the hands-on developer or manufacturer of whatever technologies that you are selling or installing or designing partially, you want to have the coverage for your error in not reviewing it correctly or not representing it correctly. So both ends of that, we really want to make sure that we're giving sophisticated coverage to, anticipating potential losses. Even if it seems far-fetched now, those are the same risks that we were talking about a year ago that are now really prevalent. So physical network security, we've seen ones where, and again, this is another alarm example, but where the actual radio frequency was off, and it had to do with a hard-coded error in the hardware. But yet, during that time, the application wasn't working, so there was a house fire to a over $5 million mansion, and during that downtime, no emergency response was connected via the application, so nothing responded, and there was massive damage to the home. So making sure that there's some kind of property and bodily injury and that's also a trigger in your tech E&O is something that we talk about too. So if that's, a particular space that you might be in, you think there's a potential bodily injury, property damage that could happen as a result of your technology services, that's also something that we want to be really robust. And sometimes it's not always adequately addressed in the GL policies, and I'm about to talk about that as well. How liabilities push down the chain, a lot of the pushback we get is, I'm outsourcing, like I gave the manufacturer's example, it's my supplier's responsibility, it's my payment processor's responsibility, I have this in the cloud, so they're responsible for the data. So a lot of that is, the direct to consumer entity is getting that liability pushed down to them. Now there's subrogation where our policy is going to come in and they're going to pay out to you and anything that you're initially responsible for, and then pursue the guys on the back end. But it's important to note that, as the entity or company that your insureds or your clients or other businesses are entrusting their information to, or their services to, you guys are initially liable from a regulatory perspective for notifying them, for providing them with, identity theft monitoring if it's found that there's particular information about them that's been leaked out. So all things that are really important to note, and that, contracts aren't ironclad between your vendors and your suppliers and and clients. So it's important that these policies are responding broadly for you, and that they're providing full defense costs and really going to cover you, even if it is an error of your vendor. And from a subrogation standpoint, again, the policy is going to handle that. So the overlap, and I know we're want to leave enough time for questions and everything, so I'll try and run through this. And there's just a few slides left that I can be pretty quick about. But Billy or Wayne or Julie, if you need to interrupt me, just let me know. So emergent risks, we talked about that, the overlap. And it's a tough thing to squeeze in to one webinar where all you guys are going to have very different service aspects and very different IT infrastructures. But the crux of it is that, for the most part, people that are in the system integration space, in the technology reselling space, have a overlap in tech E&O and cyber coverage. And in addition to that, a lot of times when these things are packaged in with the GL, the conversation isn't had about, okay, what about the BIPD? Is there a carve back for property damage if it's out of the tech E&O? Is there, what kind of electronic data exclusions are there? Do I really have full financial coverage if I have to go in and replace, X amount of hardware for X amount of customers? What's that going to look like? So it's meant to be very comprehensive, and really the best way we've seen it offered is separate from the GL and put together, because the cyber carriers, the cyber first carriers that have developed the more technical solutions are just doing a better job at analyzing those and anticipating growing risks, where the more traditional carriers that were offering the package items aren't quite up to snuff. So we're seeing an involvement in that space, period. But this is just to highlight that. So impact of business interruption, that's a big deal, because we're seeing a lot of companies lose revenue in addition to extra expenses that it takes to get companies back up and running. So if your systems were to go down, you weren't able to, provide the maintenance or installs or, design that you were going to within, that period of time, the policy would come in and respond and say, look, I'm going to pay out any lost revenue, whatever extra expenses, whether you have to hire new, subcontractors to come in and try and help rebuild the systems, and get things back up and running, essentially. So GL, and cyber. So this is just a good graphic to separate these out into buckets. We talked about network security and privacy, both from the first party and the third party. It's good to highlight that a lot of the inadequate coverages are only providing third party. So they're only providing you coverage if you get sued, essentially. Whereas the robust policies are giving you a lot of first party coverage, and they're giving it to you, it's pay on behalf of, which means you're not out of pocket. They're just paying it for you. So the forensic costs, that's coming in, cleaning out your computer, finding out where any attack came from, and making sure, you're not going to get fined down the line if you don't do it correctly. A good question is, who do you call first? Who do you notify when you come in on a Monday and you have a ransomware attack and all your files are encrypted and you can't access your customer portals, your, business processes that you need? Who do you call? What do you do first? So you have privacy attorneys on these policy panels for those very specific things, and crisis management and PR guys that are going to come in. They're going to tell you, establish attorney-client privilege. You don't need people poking around. You don't need to be data breach on Google. Let's make sure you tell your employees at the right time. Let's just keep it between the C-suite for now. They can tell you all those things based off of compliance factors so that you're not suffering from it down the line if it wasn't handled correctly up front. So all those costs are paid for in a robust policy. The first party, very essential. The cyber extortion, they're going to pay to set up a Bitcoin wallet for you to pay the ransomware attack. They're going to consult and hold your hand through the entire process because they know that from a compliance standpoint, it's pretty hefty. So in addition to that, you also get media coverage with most cyber policies. So any robust policies that we would be consulting with McGriff on are going to include this too. So that means, like, we've seen it with schools, we've seen it with companies from every aspect, but that's where, a school posts a McGraw-Hill study guide and they didn't read the fine print for the licensing. So now they're out $85,000. This actually happened a couple months ago for one of our school districts. Now they're out $85,000 because one of the attorneys from McGraw-Hill said, hey, we could have charged X amount of money for all of these licensing to use a study guide, and now you just gave it away for free. Well, hey, you owe us for everything that we lost because of it. And of course, so that's going to be the failure of your technology products to perform as, intended, or failure of your services to, adequately do what you said that they were going to do. So is the wrongful act due to a network security or technology failure? Why it's important to have cyber and tech responding primary on the same policy. So again, it's because of that overlap, but also it's because of financial damage. So next slide, financial loss. That's a piece that's typically not covered by most GL policies, even if they have the E&O add-on, because the E&O add-on is just meant to cover if the install goes wrong, and then there's some kind of bodily injury or property damage to the customers because of it. Whereas it's still tied to that classic BIPD damage, we want to make sure that you get coverage for financial damages, which is the far more likely scenario. So it's a lot more likely that you're going to get your clients coming after you to come and reinstall hardware, or say that, I lost customers or my services aren't working properly, than it is that you're going to have some massive, peril loss in the BIPD perspective, because that is more of a classic GL perspective. So what we suggest a lot of times, along with the tech and cyber together, is that we address that BIPD likelihood and be able to tie both the financial damage and the BIP trigger into one policy, so that there's no question, there's no finger pointing, and you're getting the best coverage, the expert coverage from someone that does it best. Financial loss coverage with tech E&O. So again, there's a lot of this that's excluded from GL policies, and even if it is included, a lot of times they're limiting it to bodily injury only, so they're not even covering the property damage likelihood as a result of your service error. But we also want to make sure that you have all of the monetary coverage for those losses and the cost to go in and correct it and, redistribute and reinstall. So again, bodily injury carved back, like I said, there's a lot of that in the GL policies that we see, where it's only giving coverage to that and not to the PD. And we want to make sure that you get the unauthorized access, you get the technology failure to perform, and it's not just limited to install or contractors type work. And I'll breeze through some of these last few slides just in essence of time. So there are multiple exclusions just to be aware of on the GL policy period if you are choosing to place the E&O with it, as opposed to placing the cyber and tech E&O together outside of it. There are still embedded language in some of these outdated policies that will say, we're excluding telecom wiring, we're excluding any advice or consultation that involves telecom or service providers. Some of that is language that could exclude a lot of different companies that would broadly fit into that bucket. Electronic data, that's a blanket exclusion across most GL policies where they're just not going to cover the damages and to any kind of electronic data or, any of the liability thereafter unless there is some kind of bodily injury aspect to it. So again, you want to make sure that you have the coverage first party and third party, both defense and, what it's going to cost your business up front to eradicate that. And of course, you see blanket professional liability exclusions on the GL. Really want to encourage anyone that's doing any kind of reselling or any kind of app development themselves to purchase the standalone E&O. And there's a lot of companies out there trying to add these on again, but it's just to say that take a harder look at your GL policy, entertain the thought of putting them outside because it's really going to give you the most robust coverage. And there's a couple expenses and costs accrued by the company or their clients due to loss of use, need for inspections, repairs, replacements of their systems. And that's something that I said just a minute ago, but just to hit on that point, you want the full breadth of coverage. You want it to cover all these aspects of indemnification and make sure that you aren't going to be in a position to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars to be, making your customers whole. So if there's any, I guess that's probably a good place to wrap up since we're getting low on time.
Yeah, I did have a couple of questions come in. The first question was, is cyber insurance expensive?
So I'm sure that Billy and Wayne could definitely speak to this too, but I mean, the broad answer is no, because the amount of coverage that you're getting for how adequate the pricing is right now is pretty insane. If you ask anyone in the industry, we see from a cyber standalone perspective, we do see policies, as low as $1,000 for small companies. But we also see the more robust policies are obviously going to be a little bit more expensive. But no, I mean, there's so many players in the space. There's so many companies that want to capture market share within cyber liability capacity and offerings that there are so many options, and we will always, be able to get something competitive for a robust coverage.
Excellent. Second question, what are the current cyber claims trends?
I think we hit on those. Major one being the social engineering invoice manipulation, that, sliding in between a transaction virtually and being able to find a way to reroute the funds into a hacker's bank account. And then the other one, I will say that business interruption. I think that we see a lot of companies that end up having to redo their systems, their internal systems and their data, and don't anticipate how much it's actually going to cost. So even if they don't lose out on direct revenue, if they have long-term contracts or whatever with their clients, it might not be as a direct loss of revenue, but the extra expenses that ensue after that interruption in order to get everything back to where they were before, back to operational, is very hefty. So we're seeing a lot of pickup there as well.
Okay, thanks. And then this last one, I've actually heard from several integrators. If I don't touch a client's network, do I still need cyber insurance?
Absolutely. It's definitely controlling your risk to a certain degree. if you're never actually, remoting in or connecting at the point of installation or design. But you still probably have, some kind of information about who the client is, email addresses, payment information. All it takes is an email address and, first and last name to make something personally identifiable information. But beyond that, it's that you can be, even if you're not directly connecting to those systems, there's email that can be intercepted, as we've talked about. But there's also other ways that hackers can leapfrog into systems, even if there's not a very direct connection. And in addition to that, I would say that speaks to the overlap in the tech cyber as well, because if you are inputting devices or software that had malicious code in it, or it wasn't properly, the encryption wasn't properly coded, then you can have privacy violations there, or you can have network security liabilities there as well. So it doesn't take a direct connection.
And Julie, too, we see a lot of contracts now require cyber and E&O. So I think it's something that we're addressing with a lot of our clients and prospects out there. So if you're seeing that in your contract, we need to be having a conversation, because it tends to happen a lot with a lot of our customers' jobs that they're doing. If you're doing municipalities, hospitals, schools, they're all requiring cyber liability.
And then even in addition to that, it's the first party stuff. So it doesn't take it doesn't even take a proving that there was some kind of breach or this person's going to suffer because of this. It's even just saying, look, some data could have been leaked. So I could be on the hook if something happens down the line, and I could be taxed for a whole lot more money than this by the regulatory bodies if someone wanted to come in and investigate me. So I need to take care of this on the front end. So even if it's the fact that any information could have been leaked, or you could have handled it negligently, that's when the claim can trigger. It doesn't have to be where a customer pursues you because they already know that their information's been breached. It's that you need that coverage on the front end to consult with lawyers. You want to be able to pay these guys that are charging, $500 to $900 an hour, whether it's the privacy attorneys or the computer forensics guys, to be able to come in and give you your clean bill of health. And more often than not, we don't see those things driving premiums up or you get a canceled policy because of it. Cyber is one of those things where we encourage our insureds to take a proactive approach. If you think that something's fishy going on, use your policy, because a lot of times these deductibles are a lot lower than you think they're going to be, and a lot more consultative. And the likelihood that you're going to, it's just not happening where carriers are non-renewing or increasing premium as a result either.
Yep. So to me, it's better be safe than sorry.
Definitely.
Well, that looks like that is all the questions we had for today. If you would like to review this presentation again or pass it along, we'll have a recorded version of it posted soon. You can find it by visiting psaeducation.com. Create a free account and get started accessing all of PSA's educational content. Thank you very much to Wayne Dean, Billy Gravely of McGriff Insurance Services, and Hannah Hofflinger of INSUREtrust. Please visit our website, that's psaeducation.com, to be sure that you're leveraging all of PSA's educational content. This will conclude today's presentation. Thank you again to everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful day.